So what exactly is horror? We're developing an RPG Maker game in a genre of horror, but what it is exactly about horror that can make a game horror? I guess, in short, it comes back to my first question. What exactly is horror? Sup dogs, name's TheOdie, and I think before we get started in anything else, we must first understand the concept and the idea of horror, or what it is about horror that can make a game terrifying. Is it all about graphics, or is it about the gore? Is it just weapons, knives, and needles, and everything that we think that is scary just in it that makes it scary? If we do the color red and splatter red everywhere and make the entire tone red, is that scary? Well, no, I don't think so. A few years ago when I was developing Caster's Trap, my very first published game, I actually went onto YouTube and I searched up a whole bunch of videos on what exactly is horror. What can we do to make a horror game horror? I came down to these two really rather good videos. I want you guys to check it out. The very first video I want you guys to watch is actually by a YouTuber named Extra Credits. For his October special, or in the month of October, he did his own little October fun, and he delved into horror. And one of those videos that he created was entitled Horror That Lingers, How the Uncanny Instills Fear. Then there's a second video by Gaijin Goomba Media on what makes a good horror game. He, on the other hand, took Extra Credits video and he dove deeper into it with his own thoughts on what exactly it is, in his opinion, that instills fear. What it is about the uncanny that makes a good horror game. However, as you watch the first video by Extra Credits, Horror That Lingers, I want you to pay attention to something he mentions. One that mentions how you dive into a world, and then once that horror is over, you return back to your safe place. In other words, there's a type of horror that's meant just for while you're playing, or while you're in the world, or in the story, as opposed to horror that can actually attach to you and linger onward, even though you're finished with that source of media. So check out Extra Credits videos now, and then after that, check out Gaijin Goomba's media video, What Makes a Good Horror Game. They're about 5 minutes long each. I'm pretty sure you can do it. Go ahead, pause this video. There's also a link in the descriptions down below, so I'll wait. Did you finish? Excellent. So in Extra Credits video, he actually goes on to mentioning two types of horrors. One that's more action-packed or more visual and more graphic, such as, say, the movies Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. The other being psychological horror, and as used in his example, PT. He then goes on to describe how there's a sort of horror today that's much different than how it is in the past. Something that brings us into a world, and then once we're done with it, we kind of just leave it. Such as, we watch a movie, we feel like we're in that world, and once it's done, we're back to our real world, and in this real world, we feel safe. He calls that modern horror. Then goes on to tell us the importance of horror that lingers, and how it is that modern horror does not have that lingering feeling anymore. And by lingering horror, he means that the horror from the world that we were in, from the movie that we watched or the video game that we played, it's not something that follows us in the real world. He then ends the video by mentioning the uncanny, a slight feeling of discomfort, something that's just makes us at unease because there's something different, such as the flickering lights, or seeing something at the corner of our eyes, or if we look in the mirror and we thought we saw a shadow, but when we turn around, there isn't. Those are the uncanny, those are the small things, the little bits of unease that helps builds up the horror and that latches onto us in the real world, because these are all the sort of things that can happen to us in the real world. And that's where I want to bring us over to Gaijin Goomba's media's video, What Makes a Good Horror Game. He begins the video by first agreeing and then arguing with Extra Credits by mentioning that horror is something that's subjective by both culture and by age. For example, in my culture, we're actually more susceptible to jump scares and visual cues, such as loud noises, things jumping out of you and saying, boo! Or let's say, even a man coming down with you with a chainsaw. I mean, who wouldn't be terrified of that? The other thing he mentioned was by age, and by all means that is completely true. Now that I'm an adult and you guys are an adult or becoming an adult, you'll feel that your mind has become more invincible to the vulnerability of your mind accepting what is horror. And it's because of this shield that we put up for ourselves that it makes scaring an adult so much more harder. And it makes making a horror game so much more difficult. However, in our youth, we were much more vulnerable to horror. And because of that, there were things that latches onto us that we kind of just grow up with without actually tossing away. To quote him, he mentions that if you want to scare someone, it's through personal affliction, and that it unlocks a chest of darkness and evil that we thought we cast aside when we grew up. So what exactly does all of this mean? Why did we watch Extra Credits video, and why did we watch Gaijin Goomba's Media's video? Well, the answer is rather clear. Extra Credits mention two types of horror. Visuals, things that are action-packed and just blood and gore everywhere, and psychological, things that feels creepy in our minds and that makes us think. And then he ends by mentioning horror that lingers, how the uncanny, how the small things that creeps us on us and makes us feel a bit uneasy actually builds up the atmosphere and creates a good horror that can possibly linger. The Gaijin Goomba Media's video then describes that horror is more subjective. You can't create a horror that's meant for everybody, but a horror that's meant for a few people. Generally, things that happened in their childhood so that it could come back to them in their adulthood. Something that you thought you forgot and then suddenly remember. So by the end of this video, what is it exactly that I'm trying to say? Am I trying to say that there's one that's better than the other? No, that's not what I'm saying. Clearly by Gaijin Goombas, all horror will appeal to everybody, and that if you want to make a horror, you have to do it in mind of targeting a certain audience. And then by Extra Credits video, you want to decide on what kind of horror you want to make. Do you want to make it a visual horror? Do you want to make it a psychological horror? Or do you want to make a sort of horror that lingers? So back when I was developing Casper's Trap, I actually felt largely limited due to graphics. There were a lot of things I could not do. I couldn't digitally draw. I couldn't create pixel art. I wasn't an artist, per se. And because of that, I designed on the idea, primarily on the uncanny. I slowly built the uneasy feeling with the music and the atmosphere, as well as the ghosts made. And if you were to play my game and pay attention to the design of it, you would notice that not once did I input a jump scare. However, it still gave out that creepy feeling. So, back to the beginning. What is exactly that is horror, and what can we do to implement it in an RPG Maker game that can make a fulfilling horror game even though it lacks a certain amount of visual graphics? And yeah, you can be that guy who's like, all you gotta do is put work into it, you can build some visual graphics into RPG Maker. Well, my argument back to you is, what's the point? Why not just develop in Unreal, or Unity, or anything else? FPS creator even. And the idea of the right type of horror for an RPG Maker game returns back to the simple concept of what an RPG is. It's a role-playing game. You build your game for a world, you create characters, and you make your player feel for the character. Your audience, your player, they become the character in your RPG game. That's what role-playing games are. And because of that, what the character feared is what the player will now fear as well. And that there is our answer. We are making a role-playing game. We are using an RPG Maker engine to, in the end, make an RPG horror game. And what tends to go hand in hand with RPG games? Typically, combat and puzzle. However, through the concept of basic RPG combat, the player is typically leveling up in some way, or is combating in a sort of turn-based style. And it's because of this growth that causes the player to no longer feel that fear. They feel like they're going to defeat that fear through personal growth, and it's inevitable. And because of that, the typical RPG horror game will not go through the combat route and will instead go through the route of puzzles. And the significance about puzzles is that it also helps develop a story. We can hide our stories in puzzles. The puzzle can actually define the story a little more, or it could define certain characters a little more, or even the setting. And because of that, most creators will actually develop in mind of a puzzle RPG horror game rather than a combat RPG horror game. And it's because of that, in that you guys are watching this video primarily because you are newcomers trying to get into this idea of RPG horror, that we are going to create a puzzle RPG horror game, or RPG horror puzzle game. RPG puzzle horror game. Yeah, that one sounds good. I will admit a disclaimer, however, that the horror game that we're going to develop together is actually a horror game that I built within 1.5 weeks. And it is primarily to teach you guys the sort of puzzles and how to implement them in an RPG horror game, such that you guys will be able to mimic it and be able to create your own, or help you guys expand on the ideas of sorts of puzzles in RPG horror games so that you can design one for yourself. Additionally, I created this with a story in mind that it is a prologue, or rather a small teaser, or a tiny background story for an upcoming RPG Maker game I am going to develop and release later this year. So, yeah, that's my disclaimer for you guys. Other than that, enjoy the series, continue along, and I'll see you in the next video. Alright? So again, guys, ciao, and keep RPGing. Yeah, that'll be my new saying for the series. Keep RPGing. Okay. See you guys. So guys, check it out. I got a haircut. And I know exactly what you guys are thinking. TheOdie, when was the last time you made part 1? What has it been, like a week? A month? Half a year? Well, actually, no. It's been 4 hours. Yep. Went to the gym, got some dinner, got a haircut. 4 hours. Yep.